Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story. I'm still trying to process what happened to me last Christmas. It was such a surreal experience that sometimes I wonder if it wasn't all a nightmare. I was recently divorced, 32 years old, feeling completely lost. At that time, I thought it would be a good idea to download Tinder to meet someone new, maybe to distract myself from the loneliness I was feeling. I didn't have high expectations, to be honest. But then, I matched with a woman named Amber. We talked for a few days and she seemed super nice. As I was feeling down because of the divorce and the approaching holidays, we agreed to meet at my house to watch some Christmas movies. I know it wasn't the smartest idea to invite a stranger to my house, but at the time it seemed like a good way out. On the agreed day, Christmas Eve 2021, I was a bundle of nerves. I spent the whole afternoon tidying up the house, bought some snacks and drinks to make the environment more welcoming. When the doorbell rang, I felt my heart racing. I opened the door, and it was strange from the first second. Amber was quite different from her profile pictures. Not that it was a big problem, but she emanated a strange energy, you know? She seemed too agitated. She entered looking around, as if she was analyzing my house. At the time, I thought it was just her nervousness too, but now, looking back, it was obvious that something was wrong. The conversation didn't flow. She asked strange questions about where I kept things of value. I tried to stay calm and suggested we start watching a movie. I turned on the TV and put on Home Alone, thinking that a Christmas classic could break the ice. Amber sat on the couch, but seemed restless, always looking around. I asked if she wanted something to drink or eat, more for an excuse to leave the room than out of politeness. She asked for water, and I went to the kitchen, relieved to have a few minutes alone. While I was getting the glasses, I heard a strange noise coming from the living room. I thought about going back to check, but decided to make some popcorn too, to get more time away from that uncomfortable situation. That's when things got really strange. I was stirring the popcorn in the microwave when I started to feel dizzy. At first, I thought it was just the stress of the situation, but I quickly realized it was something more. My vision started to blur, and my legs went weak. I tried to lean on the kitchen counter, but I couldn't keep my balance. The last thing I remember is falling on the kitchen floor, with the sound of the microwave in the background. Everything went dark, and I lost consciousness. I have no idea how long I was out, but when I finally started to wake up, my head was throbbing, and I felt completely disoriented. When I finally managed to open my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The microwave had stopped and there was no more TV noise. I got up with difficulty, still dizzy and confused. I called for Amber, but got no response. I dragged myself out of the kitchen, and that's when I saw her. She was with her back to me, frantically rummaging through the drawers of my office. My heart froze. I tried to say something, but my voice came out weak and hoarse. Even so, it was enough to alert her. Amber turned quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. For a second, we stood staring at each other, like in a frozen scene from a suspense movie. Then everything happened very quickly. Amber grabbed her bag, which looked strangely full, and ran towards the door. I tried to follow her, but my legs were still weak, and I stumbled, falling on the living room floor. I heard the front door slam and the sound of hurried footsteps going down the building stairs. I lay there on the floor, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. My mind was in confusion, alternating between disbelief at what I had witnessed and fear of what might have happened while I was unconscious. It took a few minutes until I could get up again and start assessing the damage. With my legs still shaky, I started searching the house, trying to understand what had happened. That's when panic really hit me. My laptop was no longer on the office desk. The jewelry I kept in a small box in the bedroom, family heirlooms, was gone. I ran to check my wallet, and as I already feared, my credit cards weren't there. It finally sank in. I had been robbed. And not by just anyone, but by someone I had naively invited into my home. The feeling of violation was overwhelming. It wasn't just the material loss. It was the idea that someone had entered my life, my home, with the sole purpose of deceiving and robbing me. I sat on the couch, trying to organize my thoughts. That's when I noticed something strange. There were 2 glasses on the coffee table. One of them, mine, was almost empty. I didn't remember drinking almost anything, but there was the evidence. A shiver ran down my spine when the realization hit me. Amber must have put something in my drink while I was in the kitchen. That explained why I had suddenly become so dizzy. She probably took advantage of my trip to the kitchen to spike my drink, knowing I would come back and drink more. The idea of having been drugged in my own home by someone I barely knew made me sick. I started to wonder if this was something she had done before, if I was just another victim in a series of well-planned scams. The reality of the situation began to weigh on me. I had been completely deceived, manipulated by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. I began to mentally review every detail of the night, every interaction with Amber. The strange questions about where I kept things, her restlessness, the way she looked around the house, it all made sense now. She was probably mapping the place, planning her scam from the moment she entered. I felt like a complete idiot for not noticing the signs, for being so naive. Shame and anger mixed, leaving me with a sense of helplessness I had never experienced before. I picked up my phone, determined to do something about it. My first idea was to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I say? That I invited a stranger from the internet to my house on Christmas Eve and she robbed me? It seemed ridiculous even to me. Besides, what if she had used a fake name? Amber probably wasn't even her real name. I looked at the Tinder app, but her profile had already disappeared. It was as if she had never existed. I realized I was dealing with someone who knew exactly what they were doing, a professional criminal who left no traces. The feeling of vulnerability only increased as I understood the extent of the planning behind that scam. I spent the following hours in a state of shock and paranoia. Every noise made me jump, imagining that Amber might have come back. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't calm down. I decided to lock all the doors and windows, as if that could undo what had already happened. I tried to call some friends, but remembered it was Christmas Eve. Everyone was with their families celebrating. I was alone to deal with it all. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. I had tried to avoid the loneliness of the holiday and ended up in an even worse situation. The silence of the apartment seemed to mock me, constantly reminding me of my error in judgment. Finally, after hours of indecision, I gathered the courage to call the police. The officer who answered my call listened to my story with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism that only made me feel worse. He took my statement, but made it clear that the chances of recovering my belongings or finding Amber were minimal. Apparently, cases like mine were not uncommon. This left me even more frustrated knowing that there were other victims out there, other idiots like me who fell for such a well-crafted scam. The officer advised me to cancel my credit cards and be alert to any suspicious activity in my bank accounts. In the days that followed, I found myself on an emotional roller coaster. I oscillated between anger at myself for being so naive and fear of what else might happen. I changed all the locks in the apartment and installed a security system, but still couldn't feel safe in my own home. Every notification on my phone made me tremble, fearing it was some alert of misuse of my cards or access to my online accounts. I spent hours on the phone with banks and credit card companies, trying to protect what was left of my finances. The worst of all was the feeling that my trust in people had been completely shaken. Every time I went out on the street, I caught myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if Amber was watching me, planning her next move. Rationally, I knew it was unlikely, but fear had taken root in me. I deleted all dating apps from my phone and withdrew from social media. The idea of meeting new people or sharing anything about my life online seemed absurd now. Friends and family noticed my change in behavior, but I was too ashamed to tell what had really happened. Months passed, and little by little, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. But something inside me had changed permanently. That Christmas night left scars that go far beyond material damage. To this day, I don't know exactly who Amber was or if I'll ever find out. Sometimes, I find myself wondering if she remembers me, if I was just another in a long list of victims, or if, for some reason, my case was special. But deep down, I know that to her, I was just a target, an opportunity for easy profit. This experience taught me in the hardest way that we can't always trust our first impressions of people, and that sometimes the search for connection can lead us to dangerous situations we never imagined facing. Second story, that Christmas Eve in 2018 changed my life forever. I was only 9, but the events of that night are etched in my memory as if they happened yesterday. My parents had gone to the company Christmas party, leaving me and my younger siblings, 7-year-old Ryan and 5-year-old Emma, home alone for the first time. We were super excited, you know. It was Christmas Eve, and we could stay up late. I remember us sprawled out in the living room, watching Christmas cartoons on TV and devouring the last of the cookies we'd made with our mom earlier. Ryan wouldn't stop chattering about the presents he wanted, while Emma was already dozing off on the couch. Everything was calm, the house all decked out with twinkling lights, until suddenly we heard knocking at the door. Not normal knocking, but hurried and insistent. I looked at the clock and saw it was past PM. I thought it was weird because our parents said they wouldn't be back until after midnight. Ryan jumped up from the couch all excited, thinking it was Santa coming early. I told him to be quiet and went to the door, but didn't open it. My heart was racing. I asked who it was, and a man's voice answered cheerfully, "Ho-ho-ho. It's me, children. Santa helper. I came early to drop off your presents." Right then, I felt a chill in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. The voice was strange, nothing like what I imagined a Santa elf would sound like. I froze for a moment, not knowing what to do. Ryan started jumping behind me, all excited, wanting to open the door. But I knew we couldn't do that. My parents always told us never to open the door to strangers, especially when we were home alone. I took a deep breath and said as firmly as I could, "Sorry, but we can't open the door. Our parents aren't home." I thought that would be enough to make the guy leave, but I was dead wrong. The voice on the other side of the door changed. It wasn't that cheerful, festive tone anymore. It got more serious, almost angry. "Come on, kids. Don't be silly. I know you're alone in there. Open the door. I have presents for you." I felt a shiver run up my spine. How did he know we were alone? I looked at Ryan and saw that he had also realized something was wrong. Emma woke up with the noise and started crying softly. I knew I had to do something, and fast. That's when I remembered the security system my dad had recently installed. With my heart in my mouth, I took Ryan and Emma by the hand and led them to our parents' room. I told them quietly to stay put and not leave there no matter what. Emma was still crying, but Ryan hugged her and started calming our little sister down. I ran back to the living room, the knocking on the door getting louder and louder. "Open this door now." The man's voice was now really aggressive. My hands were shaking so much I could barely use my dad's phone, which had been left charging on the side table. Finally, I managed to unlock the phone and open the security system app. I remembered my dad's instructions. 3 taps on the red button to trigger the silent alarm. I did it as fast as I could, praying it would work. The app showed a message saying the police had been notified. I felt a huge relief, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. The man continued outside, alternating between threats and attempts to convince us to open the door. He said things like, "Come on, kids, don't be naughty. Santa will be sad if you don't open up." But his voice, man, it was scary as hell. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I kept going back and forth between the living room and my parents' room, trying to keep my siblings calm. At the same time, I was keeping an eye on the door. The guy outside started banging on the windows too, which made Emma cry even harder. I was terrified, but I knew I had to be strong for my siblings. I tried to remember all the things my parents had taught me about safety, but my head was a mess. Would the police arrive in time? What if the guy managed to get in? Suddenly, I heard a different noise coming from outside. It wasn't the man's insistent banging anymore, but the sound of footsteps and muffled voices. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest when I heard someone shout, "Police! Freeze!" I ran to the window and peeked through a crack in the curtain. I saw 2 officers holding the man down on the ground. He was wearing a weird elf costume, all torn and dirty. I'd never felt so relieved in my life. But the scare wasn't over yet. One of the officers came to the door and knocked gently, saying everything was okay now and asking us to open up. I stood there for a moment, still afraid to open the door. What if it was another trick? But then I heard our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, calling my name. "Ethan, dear, it's all right. The police are here. You can open the door." I recognized her voice right away and felt a wave of relief. With my hands still shaking, I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. I saw Mrs. Johnson there, with a police officer beside her. I opened the door completely, and before I could say anything, Mrs. Johnson hugged me tight. The officer came in and asked if we were all okay. I went to get Ryan and Emma, who were still hiding in our parents' room. When we came back to the living room, I saw through the window that more police cars had arrived, and the fake elf was already in one of them. The officer explained that they had caught the guy trying to do the same thing at other houses in the neighborhood. Apparently, he was a known thief who took advantage of Christmas to rob houses. As the officer spoke, I couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what had happened was starting to sink in. Emma wouldn't let go of me, and Ryan, who always acted tough, was quietly sitting in a corner of the couch. It wasn't long before our parents got home. They had been notified by the police and came rushing from the party. My mom came in crying and hugged us so tight I could barely breathe. My dad looked a mix of worried and proud. He kept saying that I had done everything right, that I had been very brave. But I didn't feel brave. I just wanted to cry and never be left alone at home again. In the days that followed, our house became a sort of attraction. Reporters wanted to interview us. Neighbors showed up with food and gifts, as if they wanted to make up for the ruined Christmas. But for me, none of that mattered. I just wanted to forget it all. For weeks, I had nightmares about the fake elf. I couldn't sleep alone in my room. My parents even took me to talk to a psychologist, which helped a little. But even today, years later, whenever Christmas comes around, I feel a knot in my stomach. I never saw Christmas decorations and elves the same way again, That night changed everything for me. It made me grow up in a way I never expected. And even though it was scary, it taught me the true meaning of protecting family. Today, whenever I see children alone, I can't help but think about what happened and hope they're safe. Third story. It's been over a year, but I still get chills when I remember that Christmas of 2022. My friends Jake, Mia, Ryan, and I decided to rent a cabin in the mountains for the holiday. We were super excited, thinking it would be days of partying, snow, and fun. If only I had known what we were about to face. Anyway, let's get into it. The trip started smoothly, and we arrived at the cabin on December 23rd. The place was stunning, all decorated for Christmas, like a postcard. While unloading our bags, a friendly old man introduced himself as Walter, the caretaker. He handed over the keys, gave us basic instructions, and left. Up to that point, everything seemed normal. The first night went without issues. We chatted, had some drinks, and enjoyed the Christmas atmosphere. But the next day, Christmas Eve, things started to get weird. I was the first to wake up and went downstairs to make coffee. When I entered the living room, I almost dropped my mug. The Christmas tree, which was off, started blinking out of nowhere. It didn't take long for everyone to wake up and calm down. As we had breakfast, I told them about the tree lights. Jake, ever the skeptic, said I must have dreamed it. But then Mia mentioned hearing strange noises during the night, as if someone was walking upstairs. We laughed and joked that the cabin must be haunted, not realizing how close we were to the truth. We were walking around the rooms when we heard Christmas music coming from the attic. You know those old songs like Jingle Bells, but in a really old version? That's exactly what it was. The problem is, we didn't even know there was an attic, let alone a radio or anything that could play music up there. Ryan, always the bravest, decided to check it out. After the attic incident, we were on edge. We tried to distract ourselves by preparing lunch and planning our Christmas Eve celebration. But it felt like the atmosphere had changed. We were always looking over our shoulders, expecting something strange to happen again. And it did. Around p.m., Mia screamed from the living room. There were 4 boxes, one for each of us. We stood there for a long time, no one daring to pick them up. Jake finally decided to open his. Inside was an old but well-preserved scarf. The label read, "For Jake, Christmas 1952, it was bizarre." Mia opened hers next and found a pair of wool gloves, also with an old label. Ryan and I opened ours, and it was the same. Vintage items, apparently from the 50s, all with our names. We spent a long time discussing what to do. Jake insisted it must be an elaborate prank, maybe by Walter the caretaker. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. We decided to call the number we had for the cabin rental, to try to talk to Walter or whoever was in charge. But when Mia tried to use her cell phone, there was no signal at all. It was getting dark when we decided it was best to leave. I know it sounds crazy to abandon the cabin on Christmas Eve, but no one felt safe there anymore. We hurriedly packed our things and went to the car. But when we got outside, we were faced with a massive snowstorm. The road was completely blocked. We couldn't see 2 meters ahead. It was when the clock struck midnight that things got really strange. Suddenly, all the lights flickered for a few seconds. We were tense, expecting the worst. And then, we heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like someone messing with the pans. We looked at each other, no one wanting to be the first to check. Ryan finally gathered courage and went first, with us right behind. We stood there, staring at those cups as if they were aliens. That's when I noticed a folded note under the tray. With trembling hands, I picked it up and read aloud. Merry Christmas. Hope you enjoy your stay. Walter, the handwriting was shaky, like that of a very old person. But how was this possible? The Walter we met didn't seem that old. No one had the courage to go up and see what was causing that noise. We stayed there in the kitchen, looking at each other, not knowing what to do. Jake, trying to stay calm, suggested we should lock ourselves in one of the rooms until dawn. We agreed and went to get our things from the living room. That's when I noticed something that scared me even more. The gifts that had mysteriously appeared under the tree were gone. We slowly climbed the stairs, paying attention to every sound. We chose the room furthest from the stairs and locked ourselves in. We pushed the dresser to block the door, just as a precaution. Obviously, no one could sleep. We sat on the floor, talking in low voices, trying to find some rational explanation for what was happening. The discovery of the news about Walter left us in shock. How was it possible that the man who greeted us was identical to someone who died 70 years ago? We spent the next few hours debating theories, each one more absurd than the last. Fear and fatigue were beginning to affect us. Around a.m., we heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart raced when the footsteps stopped in front of our door. There was a soft knock, followed by Walter's voice. "Is everything okay in there? Can I come in?" Nobody answered. We remained in absolute silence, barely daring to breathe. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard the footsteps moving away. When the sun finally started to rise, we decided it was time to confront the situation. We cautiously went downstairs, ready to flee at any sign of danger. To our surprise, we found Walter sitting in the living room, looking tired and worried. He looked at us with a guilty expression and began to speak. "I owe you an explanation. I'm sorry for scaring you all. My name is Walter J.R.B. The Walter who died in 1953 was my father." He paused, as if gathering courage to continue. I've been keeping a strange tradition. Every Christmas, I come here and pretend to be my father, preparing surprises for the guests as he used to do. Walter J.R.B.'s story was bizarre, but in a way, it made sense. He explained that his father loved the cabin and the tradition of hosting guests at Christmas so much that, after his death, Walter J.R.B. couldn't completely abandon the place. Over the years, this homage turned into an obsession. The old gifts were my father's. I put them under the tree and then removed them, thinking I had gone too far, he admitted. The flickering lights and noises. Well, this place is old and has its tricks. As for the music in the attic, I had an old gramophone up there that sometimes turns on by itself. As Walter J.R.B. spoke, many things started to make sense. The lack of cell phone and telephone signal. A storm had knocked down the lines. The footsteps upstairs. He was checking if we were okay. However, some things still didn't fit perfectly. How had he entered without us noticing? How did he know our names for the gifts? Walter J.R.B. seemed genuinely sorry, but I couldn't help feeling that there was more to this story than he was telling us. We spent the rest of Christmas Day in a strange mood. On one hand, relieved that there was a rational explanation for the events of the previous night. On the other, still uneasy about the details that didn't make sense. Walter J.R.B. offered to compensate us for the scare, promising not to charge for the stay. When we finally managed to leave the next day, the feeling was one of relief mixed with unresolved curiosity. On the way back, we made a pact to investigate more about the history of the cabin and Walter's family. In the weeks that followed, we discovered a few more intriguing things. The cabin had a local reputation for being a special place during Christmas. Some old residents in the area talked about experiences similar to ours, but always vaguely, as if they didn't want to go into details. To this day, I'm not sure what really happened that Christmas. Part of me wants to believe Walter J.R.B.'s explanation, as strange as it may be. Another part feels that there's something more, something that maybe it's better not to fully understand. What I do know is that experience changed something in us. Now, whenever Christmas approaches, I can't help but think of that cabin in the mountains. And I wonder if, at this very moment, Walter J.R.B., or whoever he really is there, preparing his surprises for unsuspecting new guests. Sometimes I think about going back there to try to unravel the mystery once and for all. But then I remember that night, the fear we felt, and I realize that maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. After all, isn't that the spirit of Christmas? A little magic, a little mystery, and stories to tell for many years to come.